Good afternoon. On behalf of the Trulaske College of Business and our partners at MU Extension and Engagement, welcome to this second offering of the Trulaske Business Insider series. I'm Ajay Vinze, and I have the pleasure and privilege to serve as Dean of the Robert J. Trulaske Senior College of Business. Today's session is moderated by Professor Annette Kendall. Annette is a member of our management faculty and also leads our Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation. While it is now common to hear the management phrase, think outside the box, today's session features a distinguished group of panelists who will focus on thinking inside the box, creating an environment that nurtures good ideas. So without further ado, I would like to turn the session over to Professor Annette Kendall.
Welcome everyone to our webinar today. Thank you for tuning in and listening. This topic is super resonates well with a lot of people. So we have a number of participants and a fairly good audience today. Thank you also to our panelists for coming in and joining us. I know they're very, very busy people and all high in demand. So super grateful for you guys to come in and contribute to this discussion. Also, thank you to Kerry Hogan and Sharon Reed, our behind the scenes people. This was a Broadway show. They would be the people out the back making sure that everything was going well to make us all look good. So we appreciate you guys. So today's topic, how do you create an environment that nurtures good ideas? And we're going to look at this from two positions. So some of you might be company managers, CEOs in charge of teams. And how do you create this culture inside your company where you ask for ideas and people have creative, people feel safe to voice their creative ideas or think ways that we could do things better. They feel safe to challenge the status quo. And then the other aspect though is also as an individual, right? So I'm sure that many of you are the same way I am. So, you hear something in a meeting, you're in a meeting and somebody says something and it sparks off a thought. And if your brain works the same as mine, which is you're a million miles down the road onto something else, you've connected it to something, you've gone up and around the moon and back, including thought about, whoa, have I renewed my license yet? What about that thing we read last week? This connects to a problem that I heard about in another department that somebody has. And then out of the blue, you say, oh, I have an idea. And it seems to have come from nowhere, even though in your mind, the connection is absolutely clear, the connection to the conversation. I'm sure this has happened also to many of you. It just can kill the conversation. And you leave the meeting and you vow to yourself, why do I say stupid things? Oh my gosh, the next meeting I'm going to stay quiet. I'm not going to say my ideas because they're crazy and that nobody gets them. So we've got these two positions, right? How do you get the good ideas out of your people, out of the minds, out of your people? How do you create that environment? But also as an individual, how do we get over our fear of being seen as weird or a troublemaker if we're challenging the status quo? How do we get over our fear of putting our hand up and saying, hey, I have an idea? So I've gathered today this panel, which I'm super excited about, if you can't already tell, that's going to bring different perspectives to this problem. This question, how do you create an environment that nurtures good ideas? So first of all, we have Jonah Sex. Now, Jonah Sex is the author of this book, and I'm going to hold it up, very aware that my screen is mirroring what you're seeing, so you can't see what it says, but at least you know what it looks like when you go to search it on Amazon. So Jonah wrote this book, Unsafe Thinking, How to Be Nimble and Bold When You Need It Most. And one of my favorite quotes from this book is, when you encounter rules that limit your creativity, first suggest that they be changed. And if that doesn't work, be open about your intention to break them. Others will appreciate you for it. Design your rebellion to maximize the benefit to others, and you're most likely to be forgiven. Jonah, you're speaking right to my heart there. And I'm sure our Dean Vinze will be smiling to himself with this, because, you know, I am the rule breaker. Why do we have rules in the first place? They're in my way. So that is, Jonah is our, welcome Jonah. Jonah is our first panelist. And then second we have joining us is Donald Ratner. And Donald Ratner is, again, I'm holding up this book that is back to front. That's what it looks like. Donald Ratner is an architect and author of My Creative Space, How to Design Your Home to Stimulate Ideas and Spark Innovation. And in Donald's book, he talks about, the book contains 48 actual practical techniques that you can put into practice that are all based on scientific research. And he talks about in his book that, you know what, the office ranks towards the bottom of the list of places where people gain creative insights. So good news for those of us who are working at home at the moment, and that we're more likely, Donald says, when we're at home, we're more likely to be doing something associated with residential life during moments of illumination. And Donald's book, as I was talking to him in the before we came live, when we went on isolation, I set my office up at home and set it up in this space that I thought, well, you know, I've got to work seriously, no distractions, staring at the wall. And then I read Donald's book and I was like, oh my goodness, I've got to change things. So now I took over the lounge. My desk is right out by the side of a window. I look out to nature and trees and birds, and it has changed dramatically my ability for idea generation, but also for managing my energy, my creative energy. So Donald's book really changed the way I think. And then third, so now, and then we have also the other two of our panelists are what I call out there doing the do, right? Managing people. And so we have Dave Spence, Mizzou alum, so MIZ, founder and chairman of Legacy Pharmaceutical Packaging. And at Dave's company, he has 360 employees. They have a very unique culture, organizational culture, in which exactly what we're talking about, he has implemented in his company. A culture where people feel safe to state their ideas, challenge the status quo, things like that. And so Dave can weigh in on, you know, actually what he's doing in his company. And then finally, Nicole Readswell. And I've just got the message that this is actually not reversed, and you can see it. So Nicole Readswell wrote this book. It's called Connected, Intelligent, Automated. Nicole's book came out just last month, and I haven't had a chance to read it yet. But Nicole is Senior Vice President of Quality and Strategy at Ultranauts. And what she works in is she works in the digital transformation space, which is about applying digital technology to enhance our company's abilities to meet strategic objectives, build capabilities, and enhance our agility. And so that's what her book talks about. And she says in her book, breakthrough ideas come from combining bits and pieces of established ideas, which is absolutely true. Now, Ultranauts is a unique company itself in that more than 75% of their employees are on the autism spectrum. So I'm excited to hear Nicole bring a perspective to the conversation about, when you have people who have very, very different ways of perceiving the world and may lack communication skills, how do you tap into that untapped potential for genius that may lie inside the heads of your employees? So it's going to be a great and fun hour, and less talking from me, and let's just organize my ideas here. So I recently read a short book written by Albert Einstein, and he said that people flatter me as long as I do not get in their way. But if I direct my efforts towards objects which do not suit them, they immediately turn to abuse and calumny, whatever that word means, in defense of their interests. So even Einstein, if he had an idea, as long as it suited the audience, they were, yes, Yahoo Einstein. But if it didn't, wasn't in their own interest, even Einstein faced a battle of getting an audience. So if Einstein can't do it, how can us mere mortals be expected to break through with our own ideas? And so Jonah, in your book, you talk about the downside of that groups can kill ideas. And so can you talk a little bit, like, what are the barriers? We all thought that these, brainstorming sessions, as a group would be great, but apparently not, according to you.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's always a place for brainstorming, of course, but I think there's a overemphasis on when groups get together, that collective intelligence just emerges naturally. And really what happens in a group most of the time is, and as Einstein's kind of pointing out, most people are naturally socially attuned to making everyone else around them feel good. And a group feels like they're getting somewhere when they come to some sort of agreement about what a good idea is. But our natural attunement to making each other feel good actually makes us less creative. So, and we learned this from when we're very, very young. A survey of teachers asked, do you prioritize creativity in the classroom? All the teachers said yes. Then they said, rank your least creative to most creative students. They did that. Then they said, rank your favorite to least favorite students. The most creative students were almost always the least favorite students because they were always breaking the rules. They were always interrupting. And so when we get into this trying to support each other, make each other feel good, we lessen the ideas that come from the periphery, those ideas that are really fresh and new. Now, often what happens is the leader of a group will speak first. And they'll say basically what everyone already knows because the leader is always talking. And then everyone tries to find a way to get a different spin on what the leader just said. So then you wind up with this long meeting with 10 people who have been there and you come out knowing what you already knew rather than the information from the edges where it's really most valuable. So there are many things that we can do either as leaders or even if we're not a leader in a group to actually bring forth those unexpected and creative ideas. I'll talk about just a couple of them because, probably put forth 50 in the book. One is that leaders really need to speak last. That means that we already know what the person thinks who's leading this thing, and those ideas, reviewing those first already existing ideas depresses creativity. If you're a leader, just shut up and let others around you speak first. Second, there's something called shared information bias where we actually get amnesia about our own ideas once we hear someone else's. So before a meeting begins, everyone should write down the ideas that they think that no one else has that they want to bring to the meeting. And before the meeting ends, you got to make sure that all those ideas are brought up and put forth. Super important. If you're not a leader, making sure that someone who hasn't spoken is given the floor. You can just simply do that and toss the floor over to someone who hasn't spoken yet. Usually people with the least power in an organization have the most divergent ideas. It doesn't mean necessarily they have the best ideas, but the idea in the early phase of creativity is you need the most divergent ideas, and those with the least powers are the ones least heard from. So we want to make sure that they're brought forth. And finally, the last thing I'll say is that organizations that have psychological safety, where people feel that they can be wrong, where they can have divergent ideas, where leaders will like them even if they're disagreed with, where it's okay to break some rules, are the ones where truly creative ideas are produced. So sometimes by the time you get to the meeting, it's actually too late. You've got to build that organization every single day to reward troublemakers, to give rewards for people who take intelligent risk but don't necessarily succeed, to tell stories of failure and to celebrate those failures. If you're not doing all of that, it may be too late by the time you get to the meeting.
Great, thank you, Jonah. And I'm going to bounce off that. So I'm going to do an unashamed shout out to our Dean of the Business School, Jay Vinze. And so when I came on board, Dean Vinze said, we want you because you're quirky, right? Now in my mind, I was kind of like, is he calling me weird? But I was also, well, if it gets me the job, I'll be weird. But actually, on a serious note, what the dean was doing, what Jay was doing, was giving me permission to be my creative, quirky self, right? And also that conversation where you're going to make mistakes. I'm very high, and those of us who are listening, you might be very high in idea generation. And so understanding that 99% of your ideas are probably bad, but there's that one good one. And so when you work with people who are quite open to the fact that some of your ideas will not fly or will not have legs, that creates a safe environment to say, okay, they expect me not to be perfect all the time, right? I forgot to mention also, if you have a question, please put it in the Q&A feature down the bottom of your screen, and we want this to be conversational, so don't hesitate to put a question in there. And so Donald, building off what Jonah has said there, Jonah's talking about meetings and things. You've got some things in your book about the furniture even can play a place in how creative your meeting can be. Can you speak about that?
Sure. Yeah, I would actually just dovetail right into what Jonah was talking about, vision a meeting, for example. And he was talking about how the leader of the meeting should shut up. And that's certainly a good first step. But I would go even further to talk about how people arrange themselves relative to each other in a meeting. So everybody think about, all the meetings you've attended over the years. I'm going to ask you, what shape was the table around which you sat most of the time? And I think folks, as they're thinking now and in the past, they're going to say rectangular, of course. We got this long table. There's people on the long sides. Who's sitting down at the short end? That's the team leader. That's the project leader. That's the executive. He or she is running the meeting. And of course, what's going to happen, as Jonah was kind of talking about, is if they throw out an idea, what's everybody around that table going to do? In some form or another, they're going to kind of nod and say, yeah, what a great idea, because of the obvious, necessities of operating within the hierarchical structure and so forth. There's also some other physical problems in running meetings, like certainly idea brainstorming sessions around that rectangular table, which is to think about how often you speak to other people at the table, depending on where they're sitting relative to your position. So visualize yourself sitting, let's say, in one corner. And there's a row of 6 people between you and the person sitting on the same side of your table, but in the opposite corner. How often do you think you talk to that person in the course of the meeting compared to, say, the person right across from you? I'd say fractionally. And they've even done studies in jury rooms, of course, which are 12 people gathered around a rectangular table. And what they find is that the amount of exchange of conversation, ideas, and opinions is across the spectrum depending on where you sit, because if you want to talk to that person down at the opposite corner, you have to stick your head up, lean forward, turn your neck in a very unnatural way. You say whatever it is you're going to say, and then you kind of lean back. And that's not what you want in a meeting, just as much as you don't want the team leader to kind of dominate the conversation and direct the conversation, because you want everybody to get that free flow of ideas. So here's a couple of thoughts on how to address that, because environment is very critical, both in its cultural sense, but also in its physical sense. So instead of a rectangular table, how about thinking about a circular table? Because look what happens now. There are no hierarchically privileged positions around that circle. Everybody's equidistant to the center of the table. Now the focus is on call it an idea basket that's sitting in the middle of the table, into which you throw your concepts and your thoughts, and they can be evaluated not on the basis of where you're sitting around the table, not on the basis of who originated them, but on their merits. And that's how the most successful brainstorming sessions are going to happen. So think physical environment, safety in both a psychological sense and a physiological sense. And by the way, that's why the statistic you threw out, Annette, that we get more good ideas at home than anywhere else. That's one of the prime reasons, because we feel safest at home, not just materially in terms of locking the door against people we don't want to come in, but psychologically. It's our world. It's the world we control, we create. We have the ability to shape it as we wish. And what you want to be able to do is to transfer that feeling of control, security, safety to the workplace to get that same openness to new ideas.
So you mean, Donald, that when we come back eventually in person, I can just dress from the top down and wear my pajama pants on the bottom, because this is my safe environment at home, right?
Now that brings up a whole subject of attire, which we can get into if we want to, but you got the right idea.
Yeah, and that's something I do want to address later on, as your talk about what you wear is important. Before we get on to that, so Dave, now listening to all of this, and what Jonah and Donald have said about meetings and things, how are you conducting meetings at Legacy Pharmaceutical Products there? How do you go about that?
You mean during COVID or just in general?
Let's go back to life before COVID.
Yeah, let's go back to the normal time, hopefully.
Yeah.
Well, I think some people are meeting happy, and I think they're also not very judicious on their time management. We try to limit meetings to at most an hour, unless it's specified up front. I'm not afraid to jump in and say, hey, for sake of brevity, why don't we put that in a parking lot? Let's move on from here. Or we'll probably have to agree to disagree, but let's keep moving on. So, you got to be kind of the traffic cop, but also be respectful that, everybody does have an opinion, and you have to be respectful of that opinion. And I think divergence of opinions is what makes us stronger. So, everybody has their own quirks and habits and everything else, but what works for me, probably because I'm ADD, is everything less than an hour. Or else I start tuning out and looking at a bug on the wall and, studying its entomology past and everything else. So, I would say that for me that works. And I think for the people around me, they know that, because I start really kind of, again, fading out. And a lot of the people around me have about the same attention span.
Right. Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, we're out there inventing solutions for the problems of the world. How do you deal then, in your organization with those troublemakers, the rabble rousers, the ones who are, like Jonah said and talks about in his book, when we have ideas, we don't want to be named as they're a troublemaker. They're always saying why things don't work and saying that we should change to something. And most people like the status quo. They don't like change. So what if that comes up with in one of your meetings?
Well, I think we have a pretty good sense of humor, and we're not afraid of, hey, Debbie Downer, or hey, Mr. Wet Blanket, have you thought about this? And just kind of, if you're thin skinned, you're probably not going to last. But I mean, it's a very healthy exchange of humor. And sometimes you can break down the barriers by adding a little humor. And, every once in a while you have to just say, listen, I never really thought of it that way. I respect your opinion. I always say, let me put it in the crock pot overnight and think about it,
The crock pot overnight?
Yeah. Let me just think about it. Or I'm a big barbecue guy, so let me marinate on that, and why don't we talk tomorrow about it? Versus shutting them down, which shutting them down just stops all creativity. It stops people from thinking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then we get into that situation again where the person says, I'm sure a lot of you have been in this situation. You've taken an idea to your boss or somebody, an idea for a business, and the person says, oh, that'll never work. And the odds that you're going to take another idea to that person are very low at that point, right? And so, not shutting down that idea, and let's marinate it. I really like that approach. Yeah, thanks, Dave. So we have a question from, and you bringing up ADD actually is a good segue into talking to Nicole, and also is this question that we have from Justin. So Justin has asked here in the Q&A, how do we identify organizations that are supportive of individuals with high levels of idea generation? And that, I think, speaks to you, Nicole. You've got more than 75% of your employees are on the autism spectrum. And I understand that even just being on that spectrum, there's a lot of ideas going, there's a different way of perceiving the world. So how do you go about then identifying, or what is your interview technique for people to join Ultranauts? Do you have any suggestions for Justin for his question?
So let me unpack that. That's going to take a second.
Sorry.
Okay. So your first question was about interviewing. Is that right?
Yeah. So how do you interview the people that you take on at Ultranauts? Given that they might have ADHD, autism, Asperger's, dyslexia.
Yeah. So I would say, first of all, it's an objective assessment process. There's questionnaires, there's non-traditional interviews that are more like puzzle solving. And basically the bottom line is that we don't want to prevent highly skilled, highly talented people from being able to get a job just because they don't have experience or a degree, or because they're not really that great in in-person interviews. So we try and, instead of having a one-size-fits-all interview and process for bringing people in, we tend to look at individuals as individuals and try and meet them halfway there. So does that answer that question?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. What was the next one?
And then, oh my gosh, you know what? My own ADHD brain has gone down the path as well.
Could I just respond to one of the things that Jonah said earlier?
Yeah, absolutely, for sure.
Yeah. So I thought this was really funny. So you said that, there's an unspoken social contract that when you go into a meeting or when you do brainstorming, that, we want to make each other feel good. And so it leads to lower creativity and, some suppression of ideas. I thought that was really funny because when you're in an environment that's majority neurodivergent people, whether they're autistic or have ADHD, we missed the class growing up that was there to teach us about that social contract. So, there's no suppression of ideas. People just say what they mean. And, in traditional environments, that's not necessarily the best thing. Because, like you were mentioning, it's, if you ask why a lot, people tend to interpret that as a personal attack, or that you don't trust what they're doing, or you don't believe them, rather than just, you want to know more about why they're saying what they're saying. You want to understand it. There's so many things that can be misunderstood, and you really have to give people in your environment the benefit of the doubt. I have a great example of that. This happened a few years ago. So I was in a new work environment. I was trying to get to know all of the people, and was in a meeting with a bunch of people. And I made the mistake of someone's name came up, and I made the mistake of saying, "Oh, I don't know what he does around here." And so you could hear the collective gasp in the room, right? And so someone who was also autistic said to me, "Well, what exactly do you mean by that?" And I was like, "Well, I see him walking around and I see him show up in meetings, but I don't know when to consult him. I don't know when he's a stakeholder and things. And I'd really like to know, because I want to include him in things, and I want to make sure I go to him for consultation and guidance when I need to, but I just don't know what he does." And so someone else said, "Yeah, well, when most people hear that, they think you're slamming on him because he doesn't do anything." I was like, "Oh no, it's just I don't know what he does," right? Exactly like what I said. So, it's really important to give people the benefit of the doubt and just ask clarifying questions, right? Everybody is at work trying to do a good job. Everybody wants to contribute. I'm pretty sure that only a tiny proportion of people think, gee, I'd really like to not contribute or to, make some waves and really mess things up today at work. So, just ask questions. It's really important.
Yeah, absolutely, Nicole. And I really like the fact that you brought up, everyone's here because they want to do a good job. There's very few people that come to work every day, or even, when we're talking about students who come to class every day and say, you know what, I really want to do a bad job today. But, things can happen during the course of the day, and yeah, asking clarifying questions, right? Sometimes we're not good at communicating what it is we mean, like me right now. And so the subject and this is something that both Donald, yourself, and Jonah have written about in your books, this idea that ideas come from the edge, right? So, the ideas aren't necessarily in the most powerful people in your organization. They might be in the low status, low hierarchy people in the organization, and the rebels, the ones that are kind of operating on the fringes. So Jonah, can you talk a little bit more about that, about ideas and why that is? Both of you talk about, being socially, I wouldn't say cut off, but speaking to what Nicole said is, this idea of like, you're not aware of social cues, or fitting in doesn't mean as much to you. What do you think, Jonah?
Sure. First of all, Nicole, that's such an interesting observation. I hadn't really kind of thought of that. And so much of the science, they always say in the social sciences that there's all this bias because the people that we tend to survey are the people who are on college campuses, or the people in businesses that the professors work at. And so you can sometimes get this skewed data. So that's really interesting to think about very different communities and how those dynamics are different. So the question about why does information that's unknown and fresh come from people of low status in organizations and like people further from power? I think there's a lot of reasons for that, but one of the reasons is that often a lot of organizations are founded by highly creative people, and then there's kind of two paths to take. Either that highly creative person wants to continue to be creative and turns over management to someone who's like specifically known as a manager, whose job it is to keep things in line and put things in boxes and maximize efficiency and all that stuff. And so the people close to power tend to be more of the maximizers. And I always say that sort of maximization in a business often just leads to death. One of the reasons we don't like people with divergent ideas is because it's inefficient. It slows us down. We're at step one, we're trying to get to step two. How do we get there as fast as possible? New ideas slow us down and take us off. Even when everyone in the room is saying, we know we can't keep doing what we did yesterday, it's still so much easier to do what you did yesterday. And if it's still working, you keep doing it. Or a creative person starts an organization and then they wound up at the top of that organization. They're not necessarily a very self-reflective manager. They're still the creative source, and they bring everyone with them to sort of support their creativity. Eventually that creativity probably, that Donald, you're probably familiar with this in the architectural world, is very common. But eventually that person loses touch with that original source of creativity. Not always, but it very often happens. So what happens is in an organization, you're bringing in all these fresh new thinking, fresh life experiences, fresh ideas, and people whose ego are not necessarily so tied to what they've done in the past. That's all a recipe for positive new idea generation, even if it's just about bouncing it off the leaders and opening their minds further. And for the reasons I just explained, it so often gets cut off and compressed. So I really encourage people to understand that the explorer mindset is so much more creative than the expert mindset. And if you're a leader in an organization, if you're trying to prove your expertise as opposed to trying to learn something new every day, you are making yourself stupider. I won't go through all the studies that show it, but there's some hilarious studies about how stupid experts can be. So, and it's those new people who are just self-identified as explorers because they're just coming in with new ideas. And so I really encourage people who are creative to take that creativity and turn it towards creative mentorship rather than being the creative MVP of the team for the indefinite future of the organization.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Jonah. And that exactly, Donald, you talk about that in your book as well, about avoiding this expert label, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a double-edged sword because obviously knowledge can also lead you to more knowledge and more inventiveness, but it can regress to some degree, and a lot of it gets, this word safety, I think, is central to this whole discussion. And safety can have different connotations. There's the good safety, which is I'm safe to be a little crazy and throw out weird ideas and not be worried if I'm going to get fired or demoted or denied a promotion or whatever. But there's also the sense of playing it safe, which is sticking to the tried and true and not having the courage to deviate from the norm and deviate from the exception. And I've done some fairly extensive studying in the sort of academic institutions devoted to creativity. And there's a term that they use called professional marginality, which is kind of this, kind of fancy way of saying, yeah, bring in some people who are coming in from left field who are either neophytes or they may even be accomplished in other fields that have nothing to do with your business or your product or service, but they can bring a whole nother perspective. Whereas even eminent creatives can kind of go backwards where they become very territorial because, hey, this is what got me to this successful level. I mean, the classics, of course, are Kodak, Polaroid, which say, hey, we're the top of the game. I've got 90% market share, Kodak, with film-based photography. So, of course, I'm going to circle the wagons. I'm going to protect that because I'm at the top of the heap. And, of course, we all know what happens when you, quote, play it safe. So, yeah, you need to, you should or you want to bring in people that are going to challenge your own assumptions if you're a manager or an executive, and don't just kind of keep falling back to, well, this is what got me to where I am today.
Thank you. And Chuck, thank you for your question. I see it there and I'm going to get to it very, very shortly. But Donald, while I have you there, then we're talking about this idea of safety and wanting to, Jonah talks about this as well, is that, when we're going into this uncharted territory as individuals and we're nervous and, oh my gosh, I don't know what we're going to see out there. There's this thing within us that wants to retreat back into the safety of our cave and to just avoid that at all costs. And Donald, in your book, you talk about the role of dress and how it's important to dress in a way that, in this time where we might be hanging around in sweatpants and, the t-shirt that's a little bit stained and things, because we don't have to get dressed up for the office anymore, but that it's still important to dress so that, when you see glimpse a side of yourself in the mirror, you're kind of like, yeah, I got it going on. Yep, this head is full of ideas. We're doing stuff, we're creating. But also the idea that people can use dress as a way to disassociate themselves or create space between them and others. And this is an interesting concept in that, people who tend to be creative or a little bit different will dress in a way that kind of signifies that. And so it almost acts as a green beard marker where the rest of us go, bet you they're quirky, or bet you they're creative, or bet you they have great ideas. Do you want to talk about that?
So yeah, this is very much on my mind. I just published an article in Work Design magazine, which is an online publication. Folks can read about it, which is basically talking about the original meaning of social distancing, which obviously is the meme of the moment. I think the way we're using it now is actually a misnomer, because what we're really talking about is spatial distancing, 6 feet apart, for reasons we all know. But we're not saying don't socialize with each people, just do it at 6 feet apart or more. The original meaning of social distancing, the way it was originally used, goes back 10, 15 or so years, where psychologists, scientists looked at the effect of dress on our perception of social distance, whether between ourselves and other individuals or even between ourselves in one state versus another. So, for example, if you walk into a hospital as a visitor or guest or whatever, and somebody comes down the hall wearing a white lab coat and they have a stethoscope around the neck, you immediately, assuming we're none of us here are doctors, you immediately perceive a sense of distance between yourself and that expert because they have knowledge there in their domain that, in a sense, elevates them in a good way. And that ensuing sense of distance has a profound effect on our mental state, on our mode of mental processing, on our cognitive style, whatever you want to call it. Because what they find is the moment we sort of are primed to perceive distance, whether expressed in a social sense or physical time, space, or even time, we shift into a creative mindset. Because creativity is about looking at things from the big picture view, from the broad brush view, right? If you're in a inventive mode and you want to come up with a new product, you don't start with the details, you start with the big picture. What am I trying to do? Who am I trying to serve here, et cetera. And then you hone in on the details. And this a sense of distancing seems to actually spur that kind of thinking. The way I like to have people visualize this is if you're up in an airplane, you're flying over mid-country USA, you're at 5,000 feet, you look down, you're over farmland. What do you see? It looks like an abstract painting, right? It's just these broad swatches of color and light and texture because you're too far away to discern the information you need to detect detail. Whereas if you parachute down to the ground, you can see that's a wheat crop, there's the John Deere tractor, and it's got a scratch over there. You're now at a more granular, narrowly focused, very attention-sharp mindset, which we equate with left brain analytical thinking versus up in the airplane, that big picture, broad brush view, very abstract, very non-specific. So anything that can make you think of distance will get you into that creative mindset in some crazy ways, one of which is to dress a certain way, right? When we're laid back, we're drinking a beer, whatever, we're wearing shorts and a t-shirt, that's a very relaxed kind of down-to-earth sense of self, whereas if you get dressed up to go to work, you have a slightly, however, subliminal sense of you in a more elevated social position, and that actually will help you think more creatively. So when you're at home, I think actually dress can make a big difference because you want to create some boundaries between work and home life, and one way to do that is to change what you're dressing depending on whether you're in work mode or not.
Fantastic, thank you. Yes, so yes, I read your book and I got out of the sweatpants. So yeah. Now, Chuck has a question. Thanks, Chuck. In our new and Dave and Nicole, I'll be interested in what you think about this. So Chuck asks, in our new COVID world, all meetings are now virtual. Chuck has said he's found this format tends to squelch dialogue and effective collaboration. Yeah, we've got to deal with, yes, reduced visual connections, audio delays. Yeah. And so what are some ways we can make our meetings and collaborations together just as productive and valuable in this new normal of virtual meetings? So Dave, how are you handling that? And I'm not asking you as, you've got it sorted, but how's it going in your company?
Well,
there we go. Look at that.
Very optimistic about the football season. But,
very optimistic.
Yeah, very optimistic. But, I think that you don't talk at people, you talk with them. I think also anything over about less than 10 is a lot more effective than 150 people in a meeting because nobody wants to stick their head above the foxhole when it comes to a meeting of 150. But if it's less than 10 and encourage people to say, if I'm saying something you don't understand, raise your hand or, jump in so that they feel like they're a part of it. So I don't know. I don't know if there's a right answer for that. That just, for us, that seems to work.
Yeah.
And I promise I'll have this off for the next question because I can understand why brain injuries are happening because it really hurts.
Oh, no, I was hoping that in the next question, you're going to have like the shoulder pads and everything on. Like this is going to build, right? Yeah.
I'll get in the hot tub after my aching muscles. Yeah, there you go. I just thought I'd add a little levity to this. What the heck?
I love it. The optimism. Optimistic Dave. And Nicole, so in your organization, it could be that many of your employees were already working at home. So has there been a difference for you for Ultranauts?
So Ultranauts, since it started 7 years ago, the entire company has been 100% remote all the time, except for, sometimes we meet in person, but, for the majority of the workforce, it's 100% remote all the time. And, at least personally, I've been working mainly remotely for the past 11 years. And then I also did a 2-year stint of remote work, shockingly, in the mid 90s, when it was a lot more difficult than it is now. But what I wanted to share is that what we've learned about making meetings more inclusive when you're online translates directly to helping to source ideas from groups, whether you're remote or in person. And that's just giving time and space for ideas, creating that time and space, making it possible for those ideas to surface. So for example, when we do that in online meetings, one of the things that we do is multimodal communication. So for example, in a meeting like this, it's just standard practice to have transcripts so that you can read what's going on in the meeting as it's happening. It's standard practice to have a chat session going on where, not only there can be a back channel, but people can share ideas. It's also standard practice to have someone monitoring the chat so that they can call out and bring things into the conversation. Finally, this only works in smaller meetings, but specifically calling out to people and saying, hey, person X, what do you think? Do you have anything right now? Hey, person Y. That also helps. But the thing that makes it most useful is giving people some advance warning. We always do things in writing. We try to do things in advance. So for example, if we're going to have a meeting next week brainstorming a topic that's important in the organization, we'll send out, not just an agenda, but here's the reason why we're having this meeting. Here's what we want to get out of it. Here's some questions that you can ask yourself to get ready for it. And then, people can process it, and they have the time and the internal space to figure out what they want to bring to that meeting. And that's really important because, particularly for autistic workers, how sometimes you're either in a meeting or maybe you're just in a social situation and that great thing that you think of, like you think of it later that night or on the weekend. For us, it usually happens like 3 years or 5 years later. So, it's really important to prime the situation, to give people that time and space to get their brains together so that they can bring everything that they want to bring. So that's what I'd like to share there. Make sure you conscientiously, constructively create that time and space for ideas. Like I think 2 of the other panelists have mentioned, you can't just assume it's going to happen on its own. You've got to take hold of it.
Yeah. Thanks, Nicole. That's really helpful and insightful, as Chuck has written here. Yes.
Sorry, it's Donald. I just wanted to jump in because
Sure.
I'm loving Dave's emphasis on humor and having fun. Because here's the thing: creativity is supposed to be fun. It's not just work. It should be fun work because nature has made it such that when we have fun at doing something, we want to do it more. So I can't sign on strongly enough to this idea of make meetings fun, make the work fun. Your space should project a sense of humor, a sense of fun. Do you have toys lying around in your workspace? Are there people with, games? Is there foosball games? Is there a place to play to get away from work? Because the thing about creativity is it upends a lot of our traditional notions of what work is all about. Because now in creative spaces, you might find nap rooms. I mean, we're talking about people literally sleeping on the job. And where that used to be a pejorative, now it's actually realized that a lot of good ideas come to you. And I think you touched on it early on, when you're asleep. Why? Because a lot of creativity is happening at or below the threshold of consciousness. You've got all these buried ideas and associations and memories and bits of information that are stored in the back of mind that gets kind of closed off during the workday because we're very attentive, we're very focused and conscious. And napping, sleeping actually allows those things to kind of bubble to the surface because we've let down the gates. But just going back to the humor thing, I think that's really critical and create an environment. So if somebody, an interviewee comes in and looks around, they say, wow, this is going to be a fun place to work. And it's sending those kind of signals that tells them, yeah, this is the kind of place I want to be at.
Absolutely.
I would also say, Annette, this is Dave. it's not all party hats and balloons. Sometimes you got to put your work boots and helmet on, and not that helmet, but the construction helmet, and get to work, because there are serious subjects out there, whether it be personnel issues, quality issues, things like that, the curveballs that day-to-day business throws you. But there's nothing wrong with having a sense of humor either. And I think it disarms people that not necessarily let their guard down, but I think people, when you're leader, people expect you to be somebody that you're not. They expect you to be this stiff person, just without a sense of humor, without a personality. And I think it really disarms people. And I do it naturally. I don't do it for effect, because it's the right thing to do. It just puts everybody on a level playing field.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thanks, Dave. Yeah. I like that. I do it naturally. It's not for effect. I have Bridget. Bridget, are you there? Just gonna check. I'm not sure if.
Hey, yes, I'm here.
Yay! So I brought along Bridget. Bridget Snook. Hopefully I didn't butcher your last name there, Bridget.
No, it's great.
There we go. Hi, Bridget. Bridget is, and this speaks directly again to Chuck's question. So Bridget is one of my entrepreneurship students. And, part of our mandate here, I guess, when we're talking about ideas and things at the Trulaske College of Business, it's our responsibility to create students or create graduates who are brave and confident enough to raise their hand and say, hey, I have an idea, and to challenge the status quo, and be the rebel rouser, etc. And so, Bridget, just briefly, in my entrepreneurship class, we've taken everything online over summer anyway, but the students have been tasked with creating businesses. We're not talking about one day if you ever open a business, because I got bored with teaching that. Now it's like, all right, team, we're going to create businesses, and it's going to be scary for me too, but we're going to get it done. And so they've been using discussion boards, so technology, to talk about ideas. So they've gone from this, oh, I'm afraid, what will people think of my idea, to actually, having these discussion boards work in their favor. So Bridget, can you talk about your experience in that from your own words?
Yeah, sure. So as Annette mentioned, we are using these open discussion boards, and anybody in the class can see what you post. So it can be incredibly intimidating at first, because you can't see your peers. You don't know who's looking at this. You don't know what their reaction is. But you just have to jump in, because everyone's in the same boat. We're all there together. And that what I have found is the more you interact and the more you post and the more you share your ideas, the more value you get from that. You get fresh perspective and outlook on your idea that maybe you didn't consider, maybe a problem that you didn't think about, or a suggestion to help you along your way that you didn't see. It's just been really great to get that unexpected feedback to help you kind of channel that into a successful outcome.
Right, and not all the feedback is positive, right? It's not all like, this is a great idea, you should do it. Some of it is, I don't think this is going to work.
Absolutely.
How is this going to work?
Yeah, and that's the best feedback, because it pushes you to get to a better solution, where if you would have gone with your initial plan where you didn't have that negative feedback, you'd be set up for failure. Well, with that negative feedback, it actually pushes you to a more successful outcome in the end. And you might target your idea to what you think your perfect customer is, and find out, oh, well, they don't want that at all, and help you kind of move that and shift that perspective to what really needs to happen.
Cool, thanks, Bridget. And I appreciate you taking the time out of your work. Our students they're working full time, and they're studying, and they're managing households, and trying to have some semblance of a social life right now. It's important when you're young to have a social life. Old people like me, we're like, meh, I love isolation. So thank you for taking that time, Bridget.
Thank you for inviting me.
No problem. And then Luke, so in our final minutes, I want to get to this extra question here. So Luke asked, with the increased reliance on video conferencing, what do you think its effect is on interviewing? And Jonah, you can speak to this question, right?
Sure. Yeah, I just wrote a quick note on that. You know, there's this famous study or case study that was done in which I believe it was the Viennese Philharmonic was trying desperately to bring in more women into the Philharmonic, and they felt that they couldn't compromise their standards so to be more diverse. So they were like, we want more women, but there are no women because they just don't play as well as men. And then they would go in and say, well, let's give a small advantage to women. They still couldn't bring themselves to do it. Then they started doing these auditions blindly, behind a blind. And just based on music, but not on the way people looked, they started picking women at an even higher rate than they had been picking men. So what was happening was based on the way the person looked and how they carried themselves, and a whole set of ideas of what the ideal employee should look like and be like. This bias was coming in and it was destroying their ability. So now they only do blind auditions. And that's just not just a diversity thing, it's a better musician thing. And so, you know, there are actually advantages to not meeting the person that you hire if you're interviewing virtually. I wrote in the chat, you know, it may feel risky, but maybe turn the video off and just have a conversation. And I bet Nicole kind of has some thoughts on this as well, where like a lot of times data and facts are better than impressions at hiring the right kind of people. The second thing about that, and this is really counterintuitive for me and for many people, is that when we really want to hire for cultural fit, and in-person interviews really help us figure out, is there cultural fit here? Would I want to hang out with this person? Do I like this person? They make me feel good. And the problem with hiring for cultural fit is that we kind of hire more and more people who think like us, basically, and that creates a less creative environment. So how do you find people who share your values, who are not coming to the organization to destroy it, but are also not coming to kind of just fit in, but actually to expand it? And it is possible that this COVID world might help us get more cognitively diverse teams.
Thank you, Jonah. Thank you. And so we're coming to the last 3 minutes, and as everyone watching now, you know, we could continue this conversation for a lot longer yet. It's interesting, and even I don't know how Dave's ADHD brain is going, but my ADHD brain is going good guns. I'm not bored, which would be weird because I'm the host, but we need to wrap things up. And so what we wanted to give people today was, you know, some practical strategies that you can implement in your business tomorrow or today, or even as an individual yourself. And I hope that you've got some of those now to take away already throughout the course of the last hour. But can I just ask everybody, we'll just go through quickly in our last 2 minutes now, one key thing that you would recommend that people could do that you maybe haven't raised. And Nicole, we'll start with you.
Absolutely. I'll end with, let individuals be the arbiters of their own experience. You know, you might not see where they're coming from. You might not agree with it. It doesn't matter. Perception is reality, and that's their perception. So treat it as their reality and move forward together.
Oh, I love that. I love that, Nicole. Thank you. Dave.
Well, I would say this is probably maybe Captain Obvious here, but you know, pay is certainly important, but feeling like you're part of a winning team and that your efforts are appreciated and recognized is just as important. And I don't think maybe this time has taught us to slow down and maybe appreciate that a little more.
Yeah, absolutely. What's really important. Yeah. Donald. You're muted. Donald, sorry.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I would just say to think about your physical space. It can have a really profound effect on your feelings, on your behavior, and on your work. Needless to say, you want to make that space as positive as possible, because when we're in a positive mindset, we are more creative, we are more insightful, and we're more open-minded to new ideas and new ways of doing things. So assess the space, see what's working for you, see what's not, think about ways to change what's not, and test and test and test again.
Thank you, Donald. And finally, Jonah.
Yeah, I would just say try, if you're kind of an expert at things, try doing something regularly that you're really bad at. That's where the learning curve is fastest, and where you humble yourself and stop trying to stand up on that pedestal. So.
Great, fantastic. Thank you all again for joining us. This is the second in a series put on by the Trulaske College of Business, our Business Insider series. So the third one is coming up. So watch your inboxes for the invite to that. I hope you've enjoyed today. Please feel free to reach out to me or any of the organizers if you would like extra information. Go ahead and Google all our panelists and buy their books. I highly recommend it. Good summer reading. And thank you to our panelists. Again, thank you for being so generous with your time and hanging out with us today. It's been fantastic, and I've really enjoyed myself.